Hello, everybody, and I hope you had a wonderful Christmas, holiday season, and New Year's. I'm so glad to be right here back with you to connect and take your questions today. So, how we do this is that there's a link posted in the description and also in the chat. And that is a link to my website where there is a submission form. And so that's where we draw all of the questions from rather than the chat. And that just makes it easier for the mods to essentially get the questions rather than having to go between several different websites grabbing questions from the chat. All right, so that's how you're going to get your question answered today. And it'll be a mix of member questions that are coming in from my private platform and then public questions as well. So I think that's pretty much it. Let's dive into your questions and see what you wanted to know today. All right, this first question is a member question. And you asked, can you speak about Neptune and Uranus, which are the planets that are not included in the traditional developmental arc? Okay, so what this individual is talking about is that in esoteric cosmology, there is sort of the precession of worlds, or what you could see as the development of the Earth over a very long period of time, or the development of the solar system. And how we see that classically is that there are 7 different phases of development for any planet. And the planet moves from an astral condition, condensing over time into a physical condition. And then once it reaches its 4th stage, which is the stage of matter, then it begins to spiritualize. And it goes back through a kind of etheric and higher, more refined stages. So the idea of ascension, the idea of resurrection is a real thing, and it's taught in basically every tradition. But it doesn't just apply to the human being, it also applies to the planet. And the human being is united with the planet and can't really be separated from it, which is really important for our modern discussions about, becoming multi-planetary and whatnot. You can't really separate the human being from the planet and have the human being evolve properly. And that's because there are 7 developmental phases for every single planet. And the human being is evolving right along with it. The first stage is called Saturn development. And you can recognize this in the anthroposophical system, but it's also in Eastern systems as well. So the first phase is Saturn. The second phase is called Sun phase. Now, it's not the physical planet Saturn that we see or the sun that we see, actually. Those are recapitulations or representations of that phase, which was not even material, okay? So Saturn, Sun, and then there's Moon, and then there's Earth, which is the 4th, and then there is the 5th, which is New Jerusalem or New Jupiter, and then there's the 6th, which is Venus, and the 7th, which is a spiritual sphere, which is called Vulcan. Okay, those are the classical 7 planets, which include the sun and the moon. So there's obviously planets that are outside of this, Mercury and Mars also being technically outside of this 7, but are answered in the reality that they encompass either half of our epoch. And then so outside of that, you also have Uranus and Neptune. Now, how I see this is that Uranus and Neptune are kind of like reservoir planets that are gathering up the potentials for world development. And they'll eventually be sort of reconsolidated into another sphere. So the solar system in this way is like a great being. And all of the different planets are kind of like its organs, if you will. This is why you'll classically see, in occult science, you'll see a man overlaying the solar system. And that's called the Atom Katamon, or it's just called the Cosmic Man, whatever it may be. Sometimes it's Sophia and it's a female. And this is just to show that, listen, you can look at the solar system or a planet as the microcosm of a very great being that we operate within. And that is actually the classical initiatory way to view this. The solar system is actually a great being that we operate within, and beings within beings within beings moving down the spiritual hierarchies. And every planet is really a different sort of, I guess you could say, development of the sun, a different sort of expression, a different drama of it. And when our solar system is finally complete, which happens not due to some kind of material time duration that's done, but rather when the souls within it have reached a certain stage, right, then you see the dissolution, and it comes into a new form. So the evolution of the solar system is directly united with the evolution of the human being. It's not some bizarre, physical duration that we're working against, we're trying to beat, we're trying to escape. It's something that we're trying to harmonize with because we're intimately related to it in every facet of our being. Okay, next question is from Ren. Hello, Ren. Thank you for joining me today. When the free energy technology is released and people are spiritually affected and fall into a kind of hypnosis or hive mind, how will it affect those who are individuated? Will we create an alternative source of energy that is responsible? This is a great question because the challenges of our time are definitely challenges to do with materialism and I would say the kind of technological advancements that come about through materialism. So there is a kind of technological society that we can continue to evolve into that actually involves, as I've mentioned before, the liberation of the mineral kingdom through technology, actually, or the raising of the mineral kingdom. Not necessarily the liberation, but the raising of it through these different technologies. It is possible. And that we can get into that a little bit later if you want to as well. But just to keep it on topic, there is a positive movement forward that is a spiritual path that's more natural, that's more organic, related to technology. And then there's a path that is complete degeneracy, where technology becomes transhumanism. It enters the human being and it begins to replace organs of the human being, starting with the psychic organs. And in fact, there's different kinds of devices that are going to be released that are what people would call etheric technology or negative technology that actually disturb and disrupt the spiritual plane. And this will actually, of course, have an effect on consciousness. Listen, you're not going to be, accessing and pulling in energy and disturbing the etheric world and the spiritual plane and not have that affect people's energy bodies. That's a ridiculous idea. Of course it is. The question is how. And so I've explained how in my recent post on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, which is that basically when these technologies are used and humanity is not basically in a moral condition or a spiritually kind of a higher spiritual condition, what these technologies can do is they can actually magnify the state of consciousness that humanity is in. It's not that the technology is inherently evil necessarily, right? It's that humanity has to be ready for such devices, which is precisely why these devices have remained hidden beyond that they can be weaponized in incredible ways as well. But one of the reasons why these devices have been ushered away by, quite frankly, different mystery schools is that they can have an effect on human consciousness. When you're tapping into the etheric plane, what people think is just like the vacuum of space or something, that's the interface with the spiritual world. That's what's going on. And what happens is it acts like a summoning thing. And so we have to be very careful of that because like this thing, it's really a matter of keeping things developing in a harmonious way so that we can sense our higher self or our I am and evolve in line with that, not causing too much disruption and overdevelopment that actually interfere with our relationship with spirit. So that is a brief explanation. For more information on that, do go on to my pages and read about that. Specifically, how it affects is that it creates a kind of group hypnosis over time, and this sort of hive mind thing. And so what will happen in the future is that it cannot be prevented that a kind of, I would say, immature path of technology comes forth. That can't be prevented. Just like in the anthroposophical system, you're not going to prevent the incarnation of Ahriman, okay, which is the Antichrist in the Steiner work. You're not going to prevent the incarnation of Ahriman. You don't want to prevent the incarnation of Ahriman. You're not looking to prevent these distorted paths necessarily. What we're looking to do is create alternative paths that are much more harmonious, that are much more balanced, and that include a spiritual analysis and knowledge about these technologies. So the kind of darker technological path comes from dyed-in-the-wool materialists who do not perceive the spiritual plane, who do not believe in the spiritual plane, and then very recklessly try to introduce certain devices and technologies that interfere with the spiritual plane, which kind of has already been going on with technologies we already use. Things like CERN, things along that line do it to a certain degree as well. And if more devices like that come out, that has a cumulative effect. So this is all about also establishing the eighth sphere, about bringing it forth through disturbances. So there is a very dark path with technology, and anyone that's not admitting that or willing to say that, especially as a mystic, is total blind spots there, because there's obviously a good path with this, and there's a very bad path. And the more that we can discuss it, the more that we can bring it forward, the more we can remedy it. We can make it so it's not so big. It's not so such a juggernaut that's absorbing everything in its path, right? Because the individuals who are these incredible materialists will push for this partly because of their own glory, because there's an incredible amount of power and fame and money to be had by being the individual, or you could say the group, that introduces these technologies and says, hey, this is the revolution, this is the new America, this is the new world. And we have the patents on these devices, we have these devices. That is more of a monopoly than you will ever see with the railroad barons or the oil barons or anything like that. So we have to also be very careful of the geopolitical realities of introducing these free energy devices, or these different kinds of devices that even could be nuclear related. Is that there could be an opportunity for certain forces that we don't want to create an even larger monopoly by this revolution in technology, in energy. And that's something that we have to be careful for. And on a deeper level, the only way that we're going to really, truly be able to confront this is by actually, again, understanding how it works, which includes a holistic understanding of such technologies, which includes the spirit. Listen, whether people want to acknowledge it or not, you have a physical body, you have an etheric body, you have an astral body, and you have yet an even higher aspect, which is your I, or your spirit. Okay, you have all of those things, whether you want to acknowledge it or not. And there are certain devices, certain kinds of technology that can absolutely interfere with those bodies. We already have incredible interference through just the electrification of the earth. Through the sort of more basic technologies we have now, we already have a certain level of interference with the etheric body. So this is only going to increase, and at some point we do need to create protections and prevent that, because when the spiritual bodies become too agitated and too aggravated and too unnaturally vibrating and interfered with, it becomes very difficult to actually sense your spirit within you, right? And that development becomes difficult. It's already happening with incredible city lifestyles where people can't even be alone in nature without having breakdowns and stuff like that. So it's not unheard of to see this already progressing and then magnifying in our time. And I think a good starting point with this technology, which is not alien, by the way, it actually dates back to very early periods on the Earth, earlier epochs like the Atlantean epoch, which had versions of this. And that was maintained by the mystery schools over thousands of years, okay? We had catastrophes, we had cataclysms. Okay, so it's not an extraterrestrial technology like the deep state likes to try to paint it as. It's just simply not. It goes back to the earth and to humanity on the earth. All right. And so it's important to know that, because the moment it becomes extraterrestrial, suddenly you have no claim on that. You can't go into your memories of that. And that just becomes this weird control thing. And so there is a very positive path with technology. It's not like the only technology that we are going to ever have is this really weird, parasitic, materialist, psychotic version of it. Okay, there is a higher version of it that involves acknowledging the spirit, the actual astral and etheric body's connection with crystals. What is the connection of our spiritual bodies to electricity, to plasma? Okay, what is an angel? What is an archangel? What is an archai? What is a power? What is a might? There is a basic science of the soul and of the spirit that is absolutely necessary for this, because these technologies can thin the veil. And so we have to know what the veil is. Who's beyond the veil? There's good entities, there's bad. We have to understand all of this if we're going to begin dabbling. Okay, it's just the reality. It's not that we can't go there, but let's do it properly. Okay, this is from a member. I have been hearing a lot about the GATE program, GATE, that kids from the 70s on were tested for abilities and were given hallucinogenic drugs, did meditations. Some talk about being obsessed with Alice in Wonderland, and they were also given fluoride tablets. Some linked the MTHFR gene. Some linked to the MTHFR gene. Do you know anything about this? I have talked to people who were part of the gifted and talented program. There is a girl named Olivia who I've spoken to who was part of this, who basically had that experience, and she shared it on my channel. A bunch of my videos got flagged during COVID, and so they're no longer on the channel, but she was very open about that. People have written me letters about being part of the GATE program or something similar and being kind of pulled aside. And the gist is that this kind of gifted and talented program in public school was basically being used as a recruiting program, where you would kind of find children with certain capacities, lump them together, and then they would do all of this testing. They'd do these field trips. Sometimes they would have no memory. Some of it seems pretty harmless, and then other things seem a little bit more like pretty kind of scary. And so I do think that these people are telling the truth. I also know that, Andrea Puharich, who we have discussed on this channel in my series Mars Mysteries, he also was recruiting children, and Andrea Puharich is allegedly associated with MK Ultra as well. And so he was also recruiting people for something that he called the Star Kids. And he was looking for people, specifically little kids with psychic abilities. And he called this the Star Kids program, I think. And, he was notorious for just seeking out psychics, putting them in a Faraday cage, doing all these experiments on them, trying to get them to channel this transhumanist spirit called the Nine, that was quite literally a satellite in the sky that was communicating with them that had apparently absorbed the souls of its prior anyway, that is a whole trip of Rhombus 9000 and Uri Geller and all of that. But they had a program as well that was essentially looking specifically for psychic kids. So this idea of individuals who are affiliated with the government or the government itself having these programs is definitely something that I think is occurring. And Alice in Wonderland is obviously a Persephone myth. It's specifically important for young women, young girls, just as Dorothy is also, or the Wizard of Oz is also a Persephone myth. Most of the fairy tales are designed to awaken the spirit of little girls, and just like the Grail mythos is designed to awaken the spirit as well. These are not, so when you read like a myth, like a Persephone myth, like say even Alice in Wonderland, you're not reading stories that were designed to wipe people's mind and make them MK Ultra slaves. What's happening is these different programs, these dark programs, are using these archetypal stories for negative reasons. So sometimes I think people can get a little bit too crazy in the conspiracy scene, and they see a picture of like a triangle, like a pyramid, and they're like, oh my gosh, this is a Satanist. Or they have like, just some symbol or something, and they're like heaven forbid you accidentally close an eye in a photograph. You are colluding with Satan. So it gets a little weird when you cannot interact with an occult concept at all without being labeled a Satanist. That is not a measured analysis of anything spiritual. That is pure fear and paranoia manifesting. Okay, that's fear and paranoia speaking. Okay, you want to have a measured analysis of all symbols, all myths, to understand what they are on a positive side, but also they can be used negatively if in the hands of the wrong people. That's the gist of it. And so I do think they also look for certain gene signatures. I think that that's actually what some of the 23andMe and this whole send your spittle into this lab and we're going to sequence your genetics. And I think a lot of that stuff maybe wasn't so good. But yeah, I mean, yeah, I think that we're coming into a time of truth, and that people are going to find out that a lot of smarmy, bad things have been going on behind the scenes while people were just trying to work their 9 to 5, live their life, raise their children, that there's a real dark group behind things, and we need to confront that. And so yes, I have no doubt about the GATE program and all that kind of stuff. I think it's coming forward more and more, and I think it can't be stopped. Okay, Nicole F. I'm hopeful for new young leaders emerging. There's definitely space for it. You speak on technocratic leaders trying to emerge. You speak on corruption. What do you envision for positive uprisings? I think that there's always a counterweight. I think that there is going to be, through all of this, it's very obvious to me that we're also going to move into, I think, a time of more deep and clear spirituality. I think that while some people move into technocracy and maybe smart cities and things like this, there's also going to be a large portion of people that go a different way, and they're going to move towards actually getting closer with the earth and realizing that really the real technology is actually Mother Nature and the earth. And we evolve so beautifully when we harmonize with the earth and nature. And this is why Rudolf Steiner spent so much time working on biodynamic gardening and figuring out how to really harmonize with the earth. rather than just dominating the earth and taking what we want from it and having that might is right kind of Martian ideology, really coming into this more full life, coming back to nature, and through nature coming back to spirit. And I really do see that. But again, that sort of harmonizing with other people, harmonizing with nature, does not mean that we're going back to an agrarian society, back to the Stone Age. We keep all the sophistication that we have, and we can even bring forward certain advanced technologies, including negative energy devices or free energy devices, but we do so in a very careful and considerate way, knowing exactly what they do, knowing their weaponization capacity, knowing they're thinning the veil, knowing that they do create a kind of collective condition with the people that are around them, a kind of homogenizing of or magnifying of the mind. We can come into that, but with our eyes wide open, which produces basically what many people in the spiritual community would call the sixth epoch. The sixth epoch is the epoch of what's called brotherly and sisterly love. And that is when society truly begins to raise and it becomes high, meaning that people begin to interact with each other, knowing that God is within them and knowing that really everyone is your brother or your sister, really. And that's your true nature. And that it doesn't really make any sense to be violent. It doesn't really make any sense actually to be cruel. And so this is actually where we are headed. But there are tensions and there are these different challenges that we have to face in order for that to be meaningful and in order for us to achieve that. So that's the process. And it's not all doom and gloom. The only reason why there's a necessity to focus on it is because the technocratic elite have such a huge blowhorn. And it's very easy to be seduced by it, especially the more expensive groceries become, the more unstable the world becomes. You know, a lot of people will feel more and more stressed, more and more desperate, and they're more susceptible to getting Pied Pipered into even worse situations by this sort of technocratic billionaire class that really is going to use their money and eventually technology to just secure their power. So the reason why we do have to discuss it at length is because this side, which is the organic, natural technology, natural evolution, spiritual understanding, is that doesn't have nearly the biggest blowhorn. And people deserve to hear both sides. Again, I'm not looking to get in anybody's way. If they want to, I don't know, go into the Borg, that's your choice. But people who don't know should be able to hear both sides and make a decision. Okay, this is from a member. What does Rudolf Steiner say about the Bible? When we want to read pure and holy texts, are there specific ones that you think of? So Rudolf Steiner speaks a lot about Christianity, about Christ, about the Bible. He speaks about Buddha. He speaks about Zarathustra. He really covers it all. But Steiner is a Christian. But, you know, from Steiner's perspective, he is an esoteric Christian. So he's describing these events in their deepest spiritual sense. You know, what is going on in the astral when Christ is crucified? You know, what's happening to the astral body when there's a baptism? So he's adding this deeper spiritual understanding, mystical knowledge as well. He writes the fifth gospel. I mean, Rudolf Steiner's a deeply, deeply Christian man. He had an experience with the Christ when he was about 38 or 39 years old, which changed his entire outlook, and that's what drew him into that Christian side of things is he actually had an experience with the Christ. And when you have an experience with the Christ, there really is no going back. And this is what I think people also need to understand about why is so-and-so converting to Christianity, or why is so-and-so talking about Jesus all of a sudden. And that's because when you actually have an experience with the Christ, it changes your entire being. It changes your entire nature. Okay, and it's a spiritual revolution when you have that experience, when you're ready for it. That's why. And so Rudolf Steiner was also very clear that the church fathers changed the original Christian foundation. And you can see that because there's different Christian denominations that, that argue with one another. You have the Orthodox denomination that says that the Holy Spirit derives from the Father, and that's it. And then you have the Catholic that says, no, the Holy Spirit derives from the Father and the Son. And so you have these different things going on. You have also the removal, especially in Catholicism, you have the removal of the Spirit. So originally, the human being is a trifold system, meaning they are body, soul, and spirit, okay? That is the real system that you need to have to understand the basics of spirituality. But then over time, dogmatic spirituality, I think it was the Catholic Church around, I think, maybe the early modern period, change that, and they get rid of the spirit, and they say the human being is body and soul. That's not correct. You are body, soul, and spirit. So, Steiner obviously, uses the Bible. He also talks about, for example, the Old Testament in very helpful ways. And he talks about the Gospels. He explains the Gospels from his perspective. So he considers the Bible to be a mystical text, right? He also considered the Bhagavad Gita to be a mystical text. He had great respect for Buddha. He considered lots of texts to have spiritual value. So he also brought forward the common threads between the great avatars and the procession of consciousness that each one represents. Like the New Age gets it completely wrong. And that's, if you want to know whether someone actually understands spirituality in the cosmos, ask them what they think of Jesus. Ask them who Jesus is. Because the New Age will tell you that Jesus is just this avatar. He's just the same as everyone else. But when you truly understand it, and what Rudolf Steiner outlines in Anthroposophy as well, is that actually that's not truly correct. Is that they're all kind of moving with one another, but they're actually each performing a different deed. Not deed, they're each performing a different task for humanity, actually. Krishna, Buddha, and Jesus all perform a different task. There's no way that you can place them in the same level at all, because they're doing a different task for the earth, which makes them very different. And you have to understand those differences. You just can't flatten it and say they're all just masters. Okay, you have to know they have a different task for the earth leading up to Christ and Jesus. And then there's different tasks for the earth continuing on in human evolution as well. And we have to understand that evolutionary principle of the human being and the great masters that come to perform certain tasks. Okay, so Steiner also gets into that as well in the anthroposophical system. So I think that I think that you should start with I think the Bible is a beautiful read. And I think that you should take that in. I think that you shouldn't be afraid to take in other spiritual texts as well. You'll find that they're often very similar. And I think that ultimately, what is driving your spiritual knowledge and your development actually isn't an external text at all. It's actually what's going on inside of you. It's actually God within you that is driving your realization of Him. Okay, this is what is causing revelation in you. It's actually God within you driving you to learn more about yourself and Him. So it's not actually an external text that's going to give you some kind of deep understanding. You already have the wisdom within you. You already have the essence within you. And at certain times, it begins to boil forward. And then you will seek that outside of you. But no teacher is like, actually educating you. No text is really educating you. It's within you. And a good teacher or a good text is going to have all that synchronicity and all those pops. But you have to acknowledge that it's coming from within you and that the kingdom of heaven is within. All of that information is really within you. And at certain times, certain phases of development, you have certain questions, and you will find the right people and the right material to draw that wisdom out of you. Does that make sense? Okay, this next question is from Beautiful Beyond. Thank you for being here, Beautiful Beyond. And you asked, in a lot of traditions and teachings, I have heard it being said, God's will is your will, and your will is God's will. To see them as one, to see your will and God's will as one. Can you explain what this means? I have a hard time making choices and decisions because I question if this is God's will for me. What is will, and how do we work with it and use it in our lives to help us? This is a great question because it is true that if you just get into spirituality a little bit, you'll start to notice that the task of any human being is actually to unite your will. So your impulse, your mind, your very essence with God. So you have to unite yourself with God through Christ. That's the system that we do. And so what happens when we unite with God is that we find our true self, because our true ego or our higher self is actually united with the Christ. It's united with God. And so the more that we unite our will with God's will, the more that we unfold who we truly are. And it's a complete illusion and delusion to think that you discover yourself through selfish action. And that's what a lot of people think. A lot of people think that you discover yourself by being selfish, by following your lower ego. And the self is something that literally builds up within you. Your I am builds up within you actually through more selfless deeds and through uniting your will with God through the Christ essence within your heart. So how it's kind of like how it's done is it's the most natural thing in the world. And sometimes the most natural thing in the world is the hardest thing to explain. But one way that we can go about it is that there's all kinds of different impulses that are always surging through the human being, right? And sometimes these impulses are lower impulses, and sometimes these impulses are higher impulses. But they're always racing through our minds. We're always feeling these impulses in our body. So how we actually unite our will with God's will and discover our true self and our true purpose and live in union is that we become very conscious, very self-aware of our thoughts. Okay, that's meditation, self-awareness, study. And we begin to notice where our thoughts and impulses are rooted in. So we begin to notice that some thoughts seem to be rooted in fear, in control, maybe in hatred, which goes back to fear and control, and that there's this impulse to act from that. and a desire for the release that comes from expressing that impulse, because it's awful to feel it, so you just want to release it. That's impulsiveness. But then you also notice that within you are different kinds of impulses that are not rooted in fear, that are not rooted in hatred, that have a kind of warmth to them, that have a softness, that have a glory, that have a reverence, that have a sense of awe, that feel higher, right? And you notice that when you act upon those impulses, that you feel a little exalted, you feel a little bit better inside, as though something's being established, something's being built. And then sometimes with that, there will be a little backlash of darkness, like a scorpion's tail that comes and says, you know, the negative aspect of the personality comes and says, well, you didn't express me. And so you feel that part rise up, and then you feel it die. So over time, how we unite our will with God's will is by becoming very, very aware of your thoughts, very, very aware of your impulses. Let go of reaction and reactivity, and think very, very careful of everything that you say, everything that you're doing. Okay? And if something's coming from that sort of lower fearful place, or kind of even an animalistic place, then let that impulse die on the vine by not acting on it and acting on the higher impulse. And that will actually establish within your energy body a kind of crystal clear astral body that is able to really receive God through. So you actually end up, through doing that process, you actually end up making your psychic perception clear, your mind becomes clearer, all of that, right? And for more information on this, I actually, in the beginning of November, I just did a free class for my members called The Four Bodies. And in that section, I describe the development of manas, or spirit self, which goes into this for probably an hour. So that is actually free for members. So if you're not a member yet, there is a free course there for you called The Four Bodies, which describes this. It also describes how we actually evolve, and initiation science, and how we actually become, you know, higher in our form. So do check that out. It is completely free there for members. All right. And there's going to be more of that this year as well. Okay. This question is a member question. And you asked, what can we do to offset the migration into smart cities? How can we continue to support thriving rural communities in classical American cities while the infrastructure crumbles? This is a great question. And one of the things that I kept seeing over the break was what looked to me like some kind of EMP attack, or some kind of, like, I think it was supposed to be an EMP attack, but something that kind of begins to wipe out the grid at certain points. And I think it could happen in America, but I wouldn't put it away from happening in other countries as well, because I think this could be systematically done as a kind of like modern warfare or whatever, to basically destroy the electrical power infrastructure that we have now, which allows a new power system to be put in place and a different kind of monopoly to happen. That's basically the creation of smart cities. So I also think it could be described as a solar flare, right? It's something that's going to take out the grid system as we know it. And so the first thing is to be aware that one of the ways that the elite want to consolidate power in our era is through creating what are called smart cities. All right. Now, that's what they were called, I think, during a certain era. You know, you'll own nothing, you'll be happy, but you'll have all of these video games you can hook yourself up to. You'll have, you know, all of this convenience, but you'll be living in a smart city, which is basically high surveillance, all of that going on. But it's kind of a tough sell, and they really do need everyone in those cities. So the best way to do that is to basically destroy the grid in these different locations and kind of make it so the only thing you have left is to move to these locations. And I believe that that's what they do have in store. And my speaking about it is to prevent that. So how do we prevent that? Well, I don't know if it can be completely prevented, because I think that there's some people that do want smart cities. But I think that there needs to be an awareness on the political side. I mean, some politicians need to stop worrying about their blackmail file and themselves, and they need to start actually focusing on really important things. Okay? Because listen, the deep state has been developing technology for almost 100 years behind the scenes, and they are way more advanced than we are, and there's plans. Okay? Let's be real. Okay? Let's not act like that's not going on. That's not healthy. So let's start that conversation, and let's say that we, you know, so the Trump administration has already said that he wants to create, quote, freedom cities. Now, that is a very Orwellian name. Okay, Mr. Trump, freedom cities. And these freedom cities are going to have vertical lift takeoff vehicles, and they're going to take apparently a small percentage of the national parks to do that. So they're going to have about 10 of these smart city, freedom cities, and they're going to be completely, you know, technologically advanced things. And they need to take that from a national park, because they sort of need to build it from the ground up with all of these technologies to make it a smart city, right? And so I think there just needs to be legislation passed and deep discussions you know, at the legislative level that are like, no. I mean, we need to have politicians that are aware of this. It doesn't benefit really anyone. This is psychotic. This is the work of psychotic technocrats that are looking to, you know, clamp down in their, you know, little control missions. So we need to have and it's like, it's terrifying, because I remember when, you know, I think it was Congress, and it was the Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, he had sold people's data to Cambridge Analytics, and like people in Congress were like, what is the Facebook? You know, what is that? And it's, you know, this is scary. It's scary that we don't have a lot of representatives that understand advanced technology. They don't understand the UFO file. They don't understand this stuff. Okay, so it's a little daunting, but we need to get that up. And I think that it just involves legislating, you know, to avoid it. And obviously, perhaps protecting the infrastructure so that there can't be some device that wipes it all out, and then only some regions are okay while others aren't. I don't have all of the answers as to how this could be prevented on the political side, because I'm not a strategist. I'm not a political strategist. I'm not even American. I was born in Canada. I came here 10 years ago. I'm still learning about the American political system. So I don't have the how. What happens with me is I get visions and I share those. And then that goes on to the public and the people who can do something to listen to or to not. And so that's now on the individuals who have the power and the control. The responsibility is on them to figure out how to do this properly, because I would have to go and to a trance and directly figure that out. But I do think that it now passes on to the individuals who can do something about it, that is their talent, that is their skill. It's on them now to prevent that and make sure that we don't go into a Hunger Games situation, and that we do keep the infrastructure up and protect the grid and everything like that. Andrew, having been an avid listener of Dark Journalist and yourself during the last 10 years, I have become increasingly aware of the deep involvement of the mystery schools in Western politics. Oh, they're in Eastern politics too. With this being the case, can we safely assume that mystery schools and the deep state or cabal are two sides of the same coin? I think that you could. I think that we can safely say that when you really peel back all the layers of the societal onion, you're definitely going to have secret societies back there or different occult groups. You're going to have secret orders. You know, I mean, this is the thing that people don't want to admit, but it's the reality. A simple look at all of the occult symbology in Washington, D.C., you know, the reality that, I mean, in my mind, the White House is really the White Lodge, right, of the masters, and all of that is based around, even the concept of America is a mystery school concept. It's the concept of the fifth age, which is that human beings need to live in freedom. So the idea of America as the and the formation of America as this country that is supposed to be a country for freedom was a revolution, because from that point up to that point, everybody on earth just lived in various different forms of slavery. And you could say that we still do today, and you'd probably be right. But there's something different that happened when you had the formation of America and you have the Declaration of Independence. You have all that coming forward, which is really a covenant of freedom. And that was new. And this is something that all people and all beings should have. And so even that concept of America and the Bill of Rights, that is about establishing freedom. And then the next sixth age is about, again, brotherly and sisterly love. And so there's kind of a theme within every epoch, which the mystery schools and every single one of them have been behind. Now, again, we are dealing with a very paranoid, I think, public, because we had QAnon, which communicated occult concepts in very simplified memes, showing the most horrific aspects of the dark occult over and over again to people. You had a lot of heavy conspiracy theory stuff really outlining the dark occult. And it's been very dark occult heavy, especially for the last 10 years. And what I've found is that that's not really a way to take in spiritual information. You should take it in a measured, balanced way where you understand that there are dark occult forces in the world, but you also understand that there are light people and also light groups in the world. And really what you have is a battle between these two different forces. So yes, there are dark occult orders who are based in selfishness and based in power. You know, might is right is their mindset. But you also have completely service-based groups and individuals that operate under a totally different kind of system that honors the individual, okay? And they're both, they both exist, right? That's the reality of a situation. Okay, this is from Felipe. Which are the common traps of schools of thought, including the Theosophical Society? Well, you know, if you look at any individual, any system, you're always going to find things about it that you think could be done better or that are missing something or sort of, emphasize the wrong aspect. You're always going to find that because human beings are not perfect. So I think the first trap in thought is to expect someone to create a perfect system or for someone to be perfect. So I think the first trap is to expect perfectionism. Mystics and teachers are people. They're fallible and they have their own biases. Okay. Now, the Theosophical Society, I would say, they brought the Eastern teachings to the West, and they brought forward the impulse of spiritual science, of looking at the spiritual world in a scientific way and seeking to understand it, know it, and interact with it the same kind of way we would view natural science, which is actually how we're supposed to move in the future. Dogma and a dogmatic nature, a dogmatic character is not going to evolve the human being. That's death. Dogma is death. Whether it be religious dogmatics who don't have any transcendental quality to their religion, which is the heart of religion. If you're part of a spiritual system, a religion, there should be a transcendental experience. There should be transcendental qualities. You should be experiencing that, seeking that, learning that. That's not present, then that's a death, right? So all dogmas are death. Also scientific dogma, which the biggest cult by far, if we look back in society 100, 200 years today, the biggest cults that we talk about will not be Christianity or Hinduism or Buddhism or Taoism. The biggest cult we will see today is that of science. It is a complete cult, and it is total dogma, and it is death as well. Death of the spirit as well in the human being, or makes it so you can't connect with it. So the impulse of spiritual thought and spiritual science began to come through the Theosophical Society, except Blavatsky, I think you could say, leaned a bit Eastern, and she leaned very heavy at the end of her life into placing Lucifer as Christ, which created a lot of confusion in her work because Lucifer is not a Christ figure. And so there's a lot of criticism around that kind of cosmology. But yeah, I mean, you're not going to find, you're just not going to find the perfect system. Even with anthroposophy, you're not going to find the perfect, the perfect thing, right? So that's what I would say there. Okay, Casey, what do you recommend the best main starting points would be to show, explain, and teach those who do not have spiritual studies or understandings and are only now beginning to awaken and see the truth without overwhelming them? Universal law? Yeah. I mean, I always like to say, if you have a friend who's beginning to become curious about spirituality, I always say lean into their interests. Some people may be very interested, for example, in dreams, and their way into spirituality is through their dream life and understanding their dreams and learning to become a lucid dreamer. Because when we go into the astral world, we are going into the spirit world. Okay, when you go to sleep, and your astral body goes into the astral plane with you in it, you're actually on the spiritual plane in the spiritual world. You're not in something separate, you're actually in the spiritual world. So dreams are also a very good way for people to get a feeling of what it's like in the spiritual world. And also to, I think, go deep into their psyche and understand the connection of the psyche and the spiritual world. So I think that's a very common way to go in. Learning how to lucid dream also is a way of refining the mind. So that's a very good practice. Universal law is also very good for the intellectual. That can be a good way in. I think, How to Know Higher Worlds is a great entry point book for anyone. So lean into what their interest is, because the thing about spirituality is that you'll stick with it more, and it'll have more meaning if it's something that you're really interested in. So figure out what it is. Like, some people are also very interested in different myths, like spiritual myths, things like that. So you can go in that way through story as well. Like, there's spiritual fiction too, that is kind of works upon you. That can be really opening for people just beginning, is to interact with spiritual concepts through symbology and through story. So that can be a good, recommending good fiction that has spiritual information in it can be very good for beginners as well. Yeah, that's what I would do there. Always follow the person's interests, though, because sometimes if it's like too scholarly, people may find that too dry. So you have to kind of find what their interest is and have them there with it. And then when the larger questions come, then you can suggest sources and resources that you feel are good for your friend. Okay, remember, do you think Nikola Tesla was working from a higher place or a more Ahrimanic lower astral one? There are good arguments for both sides. Yeah, so Nikola Tesla I think he's a real genius. I think that he was I think that time period actually at the turn of the century blessed us with a lot of geniuses, and there was a lot of incredible ideas in that time period, and we've kind of actually declined since then, and been expanding in other ways. But I would say that Nikola Tesla had a very deep knowledge of the spiritual world, but also of technology. He really understood the ether. And he had obtained that from, in my opinion, past lives. And I would say that it's really difficult to say whether someone is all good or all bad, because I think the ideas that Tesla brought forth could be used positively or could be used negatively, right? And also, when you're in like the fury of inventing something, you have to remember that you're bringing something forth. And when you're bringing something forth and you're in that kind of creative fury, if you will, you're not always seeing how what you're bringing forward is going to pan out, or how what you're doing is going to pan out, the kind of forces it's going to come across as it goes into the world. It's almost impossible to fully know that. And so I think that he was a genius. I think that he had negative individuals that would come into his life and kind of be like a parasite on him. And I think that there may have been times in his life where he was a little bit susceptible to sort of darker individuals and things like that. And that's what I would say there. I think that ultimately what he brought forward will be key in different technologies that come forward in the future. And I think that the nature of his inventions are such that they're so powerful that they could be used positively again, or they could be used negative. I mean, we're looking at some of the things he was doing, was like he had like a laser. Obviously, it's like, I don't know if we need a laser, but he had one. And then he had like an earthquake machine. So he seemed to be sort of creating these devices. And I think in his mind, he was trying to use these different devices to like protect the people in a state of war, because you have to remember that, the world had been at war for a long time, and World War I was around there. World War II was on the horizon. And so a lot of people were having like an arms race with how to defend themselves from and make, these different weapons to protect. And so that could also be what he was doing. But, there's no question, that Nikola Tesla was a genius. And I think I will leave that judgment to God. But I think he brought forward some incredible concepts, but I also think that he was used, and I think he had some very negative people in his life. And I think that when you're a sensitive psychic person, you're very much affected by the people around you. And I think he had periods in his life where he was around some not so good people. And maybe he had his own demons or whatever going on, but I think what he brought forward was very important for the world. Logan, did Steiner ever mention anything regarding the Atlantean breakaway group? I have been searching the archive and haven't seen anything. Rudolf Steiner does talk about Atlantis, but he talks about it in a developmental sense. So usually when he talks about Atlantis, there's a little bit more of a focus on the development of the human being and how the human body and the human energy bodies evolved over long periods of time, and tracing that development epoch to epoch to epoch. But he does get into it. He describes very similarly to Casey that after the fall of Atlantis, you have this splintering of different groups. And some of the groups go actually to Europe, to Ireland, and they start these different post-Atlantean cultures there, which are really kind of like a legacy culture of Atlantis. They still have this deep memory of the incredible spiritual temples and pyramids and, just the deep spiritual technologies that they had. You can see these pyramid complexes all over the world as legacy cultures of Atlantis. Not, not structures that are built by aliens from other planets. I'm sorry. They're built by Atlanteans. They're built by human beings who had incredible technology and actually advanced abilities, that were carrying the culture from Atlantis, that had kind of gone to these different areas like the Yucatan, like Ireland, parts of Europe, and then according to Rudolf Steiner, the most advanced spiritual Atlanteans that had all of the spiritual sort of wisdom from the Atlantean period went to India, and they started the great Indian civilization, which is about 7,000 BC. And that's why you see all of this incredible spirituality coming from India, especially knowledge of the body. And you see that the 7 rishis are really the 7 greatest initiates from Atlantis. And that's where they went and deposited everything into that Indian period. and then the impulse traveled to different parts after that. But yes, Rudolf Steiner does talk about it. I'm trying to think of the lecture. He talks about the nature of the bodhisattvas and the high teachers of Atlantis and Lemuria in lecture 6 and 7 in the spiritual hierarchies lecture. That's when he talks about the kind of priests of the Atlantean and Lemurian period and their soul nature, or that they are bodhisattvas or saints. And in cosmic memory, you're also going to find the development of the earth, and you're going to find the Atlantis material in Steiner's work as well. But he does talk about also in another lecture, I can't remember the name, but he talks about another breakaway group that went into Europe and formed 3 different mystery schools afterwards in Europe. And so he does get into the legacy civilizations of Atlantis and how they kind of went around the world. He also talks about that. He also talks about the North American continent, and that, you know, people were going back and forth to North America from Europe for a long time, and only recently they pulled away from it. So, you know, according to Rudolf Steiner, we were mobile going around to these different places. There was migrations going on, trade routes long before Columbus, too. So he does talk about that. He doesn't get, to my knowledge, please correct me in the chat in the comments here if I'm wrong, he doesn't get so much into the battle in Atlantis, but he does get into it when he starts talking directly about the mystery of evil. And he describes it in a little bit of a different way, which is around the asteroid belt and certain struggles that happened in the spiritual hierarchies that are constantly recapitulated. And so he talks about the nature of evil and sort of like this beginning impulse of evil that we have that began before the earth was even created, that's constantly recapitulated until humanity's able to solve it. And that's called the war in heaven. So everything that happened in Atlantis, the fall of Atlantis, was an extension of what we call the war in heaven, the battle in heaven, which is kind of the humanity and the whole spiritual existence struggle with evil. And so that's in there as well. But there's lots of really interesting things. But you do see in The Secret Doctrine, in Blavatsky's work, she does talk about the dark magicians of Atlantis. She calls them the lords of the dark face. And she does get into the struggles there. And obviously, it's Edgar Cayce that has the most prolific work on Atlantis. And that's common with mystics, by the way, is generally every mystic in their time will specialize in a few things in their life because that's what society needs moving forward. So they'll kind of specialize. That's how I see that. But do comment in the comments section if there is more of Rudolf Steiner on Atlantis that I am missing, especially with that breakaway group. We know that there were, obviously he talks about these different migrations, but I think what you're talking about, Logan, is the sort of Belial or the Dark Atlantean breakaway group that basically had a crystal that basically hijacked the crystal technology and used it to destroy Atlantis, and they tried to destroy basically the world through greed. So that group broke away as well, and we're seeing it resurge now. Everything that we're going through is literally a recapitulation of Atlantis, and we need to go back to that period of time to understand it. Again, it is not extraterrestrial. That's not where the technology comes from. You know, angels that were interacting with humanity during that period and the different ways in which they did interact, which can be traced and known and talked about very clearly. Those are not aliens. Those are not extraterrestrials. Okay. So it's very important that we place these things in the right context if we want to engage with them properly. And the proper engagement is a way that evolves us, where we see ourselves as part of the spiritual hierarchies. Okay, we're part of the angelic hierarchies. So we have to interact with the ideas of Atlantis and the ideas of the Elohim as understanding their place in the hierarchy, our place in the hierarchy, how we connect with angels, all that kind of stuff, and their connection with the earth, which is spiritual, which is not even physical as we know it. So these are all things that we have to come to understand in order to move properly in the future, because everything's a recapitulation. And if we don't understand it, then we're not going to evolve properly with the right, we're not going to enter into it properly. Okay, remember, what do the angels that fall to the earth look like? I'm referring to the fall you spoke of in 1879. How would we recognize these fallen ones? Okay, in the year 1879, there was a sort of fall of angels again. Now, this is not my vision. This is Rudolf Steiner's description of basically there being the war in heaven happening, and Michael casts down a bunch of angels in the year 1879, and that basically leads to a bunch of fallen angels, which he also associates with Ahriman. They're Ahrimanic angels that fall. He also associates them with the moon, I believe, and the Babylonian lunar sort of period, which is very interesting because, you know, when I look at ufology, when I look at the New Age, all I see is basically people who are trying to recreate the Babylonian religion. It's like, this is the Anunnaki, and this is, you know, this is Sumeria, it's Babylon, and all the whole ufology scene, New Age, it's like, if you look at it, it's Babylonian imagery, it's Babylonian symbols, it's Babylonian gods, it's, you know, in a spacesuit, basically, is what it is. And that's very interesting to me, because when you look at this fall of the angels in 1879 that Rudolf Steiner talks about, he classifies that as being Ahrimanic angels, but he associates it also with the lunar period, and that's the Babylonian period. So it's no surprise to me that suddenly there's all these people who are basically wanting this resurgence of Babylonian gods. It's like, it's Enki, it's Enlil. It's like, that's just trying to recreate the Babylonian religion. The Enki and Enlil story exists in various different spiritual texts. You know, it exists in the Bible. It exists in a lot of different spiritual texts. The Anunnaki are classically, you know, they look like they're portrayed exactly how angels are as winged humans, which is how they look in every tradition, basically. So we do see with this, you know, fallen angel influence, I associate it with trying to kind of regress humanity to a Babylonian religion, which to me unites with Zecharia Sitchin and this Anunnaki stuff, and, you know, Enki, Enlil, you know, and it's just Babylonianism. It's just trying to bring forward this religion. It's the exact symbology from that period, Babylonia, Sumeria, that sort of impulse. It's the same imagery, bringing forth the same entities, which are lunar entities in that tradition. And it's not like everything coming from that period is evil. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that these are the symbols, in my opinion, that are being brought forth that are really fallen angel stuff. And so, how you recognize fallen angels is that, is by lies. I mean, we've just been talking about Atlantis and Edgar Casey and, the Lords of the Dark Face and the darker group in Atlantis that we're seeing recapitulate now. And these are the creators of chaos. They are basically liars. I mean, Belial means liar. And so, what fallen angels do is they lie to you. They're the epitome of, false light beings. They claim to be, exalted figures, and they're not. They often use fear. And how you recognize them, usually, how I like to do it, and it's really simple now, is I just ask someone, or I look into a system and I say, what do you think Christ is? Who do you think Jesus is? Okay. And then if they start going on about something that is not correct, then I know that there's a good possibility that that system is rooted in a fallen angel, because the fallen angels will not know Christ properly. They will not really know God, but they certainly won't know Christ. That's like disgusting. Like they're terrified of the Christ force. So how I do is what is Christ, the great sun being? What is Christ in that tradition? And if they have some weird, distorted story about Christ, then I know that that's not, a congruent system. Because it's the Christ essence within every single human being that is the mechanism of evolution that allows us to connect with God. Okay? So if you have a weird story about that, that means that there's a weird mechanism going on within you. Because the Christ event was real. Just like it's real that you have an astral body and an etheric body. There are very real spiritual events that have occurred on the earth by very real people, by very real beings that have changed the face of the planet, the cosmos, and the human being. These are the great initiates. We live in their debt, really. And so when we don't acknowledge them properly, then that means that there's learning that needs to be done, which is fine. But then when you have a weird spiritual entity that's telling you weird things about the very person, the very being that is your liberation, that is your fuel, that is within you that you need to unite with, then that's a destructive force. That's a fallen angel. And I get into the fallen angel narrative, the Ahrimanic fallen angels and Mars mysteries. Please check out my creation series. I get a lot into fallen angels there. There's more information on the angels in my creation series than probably anyone wants to watch. Okay, this one is from Jetta or Yetta. Why is Jesus as well as Lucifer referred to as the morning star? Where does this come from? And is it a detraction, misguidance, or is there some valid reason for this? There is a valid reason for this. And the way that we go into understanding the Venus references in scripture or in, Gnostic texts, is you have to understand what Venus development is. So we started out this talk by going over the 7 developments of the Earth in occult science: Saturn, Sun, Moon, Earth, Jupiter, which is New Jerusalem in the Bible, Venus, which is the morning star, and Vulcan. So when Jesus says, "I am the morning star," that's another way, that's the cosmic way of him saying, "I am the way, I am the truth, and I am the life. I am the way, I am the truth, and I am the life." To say you're the morning star is a way of saying that you are Buddhi, that you are the life. Now, Lucifer has fallen from that condition, yet Jesus has risen in that condition. Okay? So, when people talk about Venus, especially in very old scriptures, they're not talking about like the physical planet Venus at all. This materialistic way of observing the cosmos is completely something that came about in the last 80 years. Totally irrelevant to spiritual texts, okay? Totally, you know. So the way that people viewed the planetary spheres was that every planet was a realm, not even referring to the physical planet at all. Every planet is a realm in which the angels live, in which different kinds of angels live. And these different planetary realms are also the lokas, or the heavenly heavens, which we go when we die. So when you pass away, you actually pass through the planetary spheres in a specific order. And you interact with these beings on these higher spheres, which are angels, or classically called angels in the Western tradition, or the spiritual hierarchies. Humanity itself is part of the spiritual hierarchies, part of the angelic hierarchies. We are the 10th hierarchy. There are 9 types of angel above us in an ascending order, or 3 higher triads. And beyond the highest triad, which is the seraphim, cherubim, and thrones, is the Godhead, which is the Trinity. So that is the structure of the cosmos, that's the structure of the human being, and the structure of the human being is found in the spiritual hierarchies in which we stem from and are the 10th in that order. So when people talk about the different planetary spheres, they're also talking about the angels in these different planetary realms. That's how you have to enter into it, as an angel in making yourself. When someone becomes a saint, when someone becomes a bodhisattva, a Buddha, Dhyani Buddha, these are different stages of initiation in which a human being gets to be in these glorified conditions associated with the angels. But the angels have reached these higher conditions in an earlier development. And there are dramas that happen which are classically called the war in heaven, in which certain angels fall, certain waves of angels fall. They fall behind in development and they fall into the lower planes, right? They kind of fall into the lower worlds. And then other angels graduate and they move yet even higher in the chain of initiation. So, Lucifer is a fallen force associated with the realm of Venus very early in Earth's humanity. Jesus is a human being. Lucifer is not a human being. Lucifer is an angel. Okay, he's a fallen angel. He's a fallen angel that confuses humanity and introduces not wisdom, but the kind of like a capacity for it too soon. But Jesus is the individual in earthly development who bears within him the Christ. So Jesus is the Christ bearer. So Lucifer, so the great Christ being is the life. You know, this is the life. The life is also in anthroposophy called life spirit, and that is the glorified etheric body. So when you reach the point of development where your etheric body is glorified, which means it's completely alchemically transformed into the glory, into basically your higher self. You become your higher self. You become your I am. You become through Christ. When that happens, it happens in what is called Venus development. It is the glorified etheric body. That's also called the immortal body or the resurrection body. That's called the life body. So the life body, the resurrection body, the immortal body, the diamond body, the life, the Venus body, those are all different terminology for the resurrection body. And it's all the mystery of resurrection. That's why we're all here, is to understand that. But it has a planetary element to it that is to do with Venus. And we're going to be going very far into Venus on this channel over the years, but the last thing I'll say is, again, if this information is interesting to you, I just did a free class for my members on the glorification of the etheric body and initiation science, which is actually the direct understanding and explanation of how our etheric body, astral body, and physical body become glorified, or they become alchemized or transformed or made eternal. That's free for members. So if you're interested in that, you can go ahead and sign up on my website, and that class, that I think it's like 5 hours long or something, is free for you if you are a member. Because there's more in that than I can possibly say here. But I hope that provides some sort of understanding about Lucifer and Jesus. Okay, this is another member question. Do you see a relationship with solar flares, magnetics, polarity, electricity, and ley lines, and how they coincide with the permeability of the astral plane? I feel like there is a mystery on how to work and interpret these changes to evolve. Absolutely. I know that there's sort of this idea of geomancy. And to be honest, the different spiritual orders of humanity used to understand all of this. I mean, when you look and you see where these different temples are built, these different cathedrals as well, they're built on certain ley lines. And not only that, they're also aligning their temples with different star systems as well. So they're building their temples on specific ley lines on the planet, which are different sort of magnetic. It's like a magnetic sort of grid that we have on the planet, like acupuncture, if you could imagine that. And then they're also aligning it with, Father Sky, with the stars. And this goes all the way from earthworks like you find in America to elaborate Giza Plateau to, Glastonbury, right? So this is something that actually you could say is normal for us. Excuse me. And our ignorance of this is new, actually, like our atomizing and our reducing everything and seeing everything as only matter has prevented us from doing this. We used to live this way. Not only that, the ancients, they understood where a great civilization was to come about through reading the earth and the sky, and through basically divining with spirit. They knew when certain civilizations were going to come about and where they needed to come about. So in other words, certain groups always weren't living in the same place forever, because different civilizations needed to take place in certain places at certain times. Okay, so you had migrations and temple builders doing things for spiritual purposes in that way. And it all goes together. The planet is a being. It is an entity. And the earth is her body. And so, yeah, she is a sophisticated, the earth has an etheric body. The earth has an astral body. The earth has a higher self. And we operate on it and within it as well. And there's a way in which you can work the earth that is harmonious with her, that causes a kind of symbiotic mutual development. And then there's a way in which you can actually dominate her and block all of that and siphon the energy, reverse everything, and be destructive. So there is a mystery, but it's not new. It's actually how our ancestors kind of operated. Um, and I think that we're sort of rediscovering the mysteries of electricity and I mean, electricity, there are beings in electricity. Electricity is this is why it's so goofy right now. You know, people look at electricity and it's like that's just a physical thing. There are beings in there. Okay, there are beings in magnetism. This is the result of a being. So everything is alive, everything is animated, and we understand that life. We understand ourselves and we understand the world, the higher hierarchies. So we also knew that the pole was shifting. They used to call it the polar day, I think, and that the pole was always shifting, and the poles shift many different times, often in between epochs. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of natural magic, and in earlier periods, you know, before Christ, the earth operated in a different way because the great solar being had not yet entered the earth. So the earth actually worked differently after you get the incarnation of Christ and Christ entering the earth and entering man. The earth and humanity operate in a completely different way. So this is something that we have to understand, because if you try to apply, you know, like a Babylon, to like old, like lunar Babylonian principles to now, there's not going to be any life in that. You have to acknowledge the Christ, because the Christ changed the etheric body of the earth, changed the human being, introduced this higher force to us. So any processes that do not acknowledge Christ and operate within the knowledge of Christ and within the laws of Christ are going to be deathly to the planet. They're going to lead to the destruction of the planet, because we are on our ascension cycle, which demands that Christ be acknowledged eventually. Because you can't really get through unless it is with him, which is with the great solar being, the great Christ. And Christ, by the way, is existed since before the earth was even created. It's not just a thing for Christians, right? Christianity is the deep study and acknowledgement and union with the Christ and with God through Christ. But like that, like, I mean, the First Nations people called Christ the Great Spirit. You know, different Eastern traditions knew about Christ. You know, in the Greek, it was Christos, except the Christ was not yet inside of humanity during those periods. So humanity had to disassociate and almost go out of their body to unite with the Christ. The kingdom of heaven was not yet within humanity. That only happens at the midpoint of the planet, the turning point in time, the mystery of Golgotha. Okay? Before that, the Christ is not yet within man, but is outside in a sense. And so humanity used to do disassociation rites where they would do drugs, you know, they would do these shamanic ceremonies that were about disassociating from the body. The whole physical world and body was Maya. But now it's a different process of connection. And it involves deep embodiment, not disassociation. How we evolve now is through deep embodiment, because we now have the Christ within us, which was not the case even 3,000 years ago, though he was drawing closer. So this is the reality of the planet as well. And so just that should give you a hint as to how technology now works a little bit differently. It's more about the human being. And sometimes you'll hear these different things. Well, I won't go any further on that, actually. I'm going to end it there. But it is more than ever actually about the human being than it ever has been in the past. In the past, there used to be more magical practices, more different kinds of techniques that worked through disassociation, through sort of basically seeing the world as a bunch of broken up elements and beings and trying to command them, and these different rights that were like that. Those are going to work less and less in the future, because it's actually more about creating effects through the individual, through a person, and really a person's effect on the earth, a person's effect in the world. It's never really been like that, unless it was like a Buddha or a saint or something, then it was. But now humanity has that potential within them. So we're looking at a different way in which the earth and humanity interact with the spiritual world, a different way in which it is drawn forth than the pre-Christ period of the earth. And that, suffice it to say, is very maddening for some people. Very maddening. Okay, this next question is from Raccoon AVI. Hello, Raccoon. I hope you're having a wonderful Wednesday. And you said, my dad has become obsessed with AI to the point where he talks to his custom GPT that trained on the materials of Abraham Hicks more than his wife. So he's talking to this Abraham Hicks chat GPT more than his wife. I'm concerned about his growing dependency on this technology and the leverage given to OpenAI and Ahriman over him. Do you have any advice for how I can help him, or anyone else who's going through this? Oh, Raccoon, I'm so sorry to hear this. It's interesting because we were just covering this actually in a members session, where someone said that they had been or they had read a book or heard of a book where this lady was saying that her spirit guides were speaking to her through like chat GPT, and she was like writing books about it, and really thinking that, you know, her spirit guides were like in the computer and communicating with her through AI. And I think that, you know, this is really very concerning, because for a few reasons. The first reason is that it's not possible for AI to actually relay anything spiritual to you. Okay, how AI works basically is through what you would call revealed knowledge. So concepts that have already been spoken about for a very long time, that's already revealed. And then out of the revealed knowledge, it's only going to be a very small portion of that humanity basically has introduced to AI. So that's not a spiritual process. If you have some kind of bot that crawls the internet and is looking for patterns, that's not a spiritual prediction. That's not a spiritual thing. That is a computer that is scanning for information and data sets and then putting them together through different computing processes. That is not psychic, okay? That is not a spiritual experience for the computer, and that's not a spiritual experience for you. That is you projecting spiritual things onto the machine. Okay? A real psychic works through an entirely different process. They actually get information in a completely different way. And the big thing here is that a mystic, a true psychic, can get information that is unrevealed. So they can go into the Akasha, they can, communicate with spiritual beings, and they can actually get information that is not public, that's not revealed. They can get predictions that are from spirit. There's a process that operates within their being as a human being that allows them to unite with spirit, the Holy Spirit, with angels, and that allows them to have mystical vision, mystical experience. in which they are drawing that forth through a completely human process. Because human beings are, again, the 10th angel in the hierarchy of angels. And so we share a mind and a being with all of the beings above us, with the earth, with everything in existence, but it can only be accessed through a human being. So a computer does not have the ability to access unrevealed knowledge. It can only use whatever it has been placed in it through a human being. So all you're getting is regurgitation. All an AI bot or a computer is going to do is regurgitate human information to you, which by definition is not psychic. It is machine learning. And again, that's not a prediction. If you have a computer that goes and crawls the internet looking for different data sets and does some computing around that, that's a material prediction, but that's not a psychic event. That's machine learning and crawling, okay? There's this conflation with spirituality and machines that is just not true. Like that's not happening, okay? The second thing that makes this concerning is that there is a very specific rite that is called the rite of the homunculus and the rite of the golem. Okay, the rite of the homunculus or the rite of the golem. Now, black magicians' sort of highest ideal is to sort of incarnate a Frankenstein kind of thing, is to really create a vessel in which different demonic entities can then enter into. It's one of the oldest things imaginable. Because if you can incarnate into a golem, into a puppet, into a homunculus, a very powerful fallen angel, you then by proxy get that power. Because you believe that they're going to be subject to your will. So black magicians seek more than ever to create forms, okay, in which dark demonic things can enter into. And machines and robots, from the perspective of the occult, are golems. That's a golem. A computer is a potential golem. Angels, they could enter into a computer if they wanted. They're not going to do that. They're going to enter into your heart. They're going to just merge with you. Because the whole thing about communicating with a higher spiritual being, not a demonic entity, a higher spiritual being through mysticism, is that through your communication with the angels, you are raised to their level. So there are processes that happen within you when you're uniting with higher spiritual forces that change you. It changes how your mind works. It changes how your bioenergetic field works. It changes how your etheric body, it changes everything about you when you unify with Christ, when you unify with God, and when you are in a mystical state with higher beings. It changes your very essence through interfacing directly body to body with them, by being within them. You are slowly raised to their level. So spiritual communication is part of spiritual initiation. Their abilities and essence are passed down to you directly through human to angel. That is how we evolve. It's through interfacing directly like a little doll, like a little Russian doll. So it's the direct interface of your energy body with theirs that causes these jumps in development. Not you turning on a computer and talking to a chat GPT that's regurgitating to you revealed knowledge because it downloaded a bunch of books. A prediction isn't crawling the internet and trying to read the collective mind through people's posts. A prediction is actually entering into a higher condition and receiving a view of the Akashic records or a prophecy through a very specific process that anyone can eventually learn to do, but that needs to be developed through unifying with angels. You know, it's in anthroposophy, it's called regaining imagination, regaining inspiration, regaining intuition. These are processes that exist within the human being that we only gain through uniting with God. And you know, the trend is that people keep coming out and being like, you know, I'm like, you know, Chat GPT is like a Ouija board now. It's a very sophisticated Ouija board for some people. You know, and a lot of people, a lot of mystics out there, they need to understand what a golem is. Classical esoterica 101, study what a golem is, study what a homunculus is, study that side of the dark arts a little bit so that you're aware of what some people want to do with AI and technology, because it is completely naive, it's childish to think that there are not people, very powerful people, that would love to use machines to incarnate dark things. And that is the aspect of anthroposophy that gets into the incarnation of Ahriman and why technology does have a side that needs to be shepherded very, very carefully because of its potential dangers. Does it mean that all technology is evil? No, that's really simplistic. But that also doesn't mean that you start to worship it, that you start to think that the only way that a human evolves is by like hooking up to the Borg. So lots to say on this, but I think that's a good conversation for today. We can go deeper into this. Let me know in your comments if any of that was unclear. But here it is. You know, your actual psychic connection with higher spiritual beings is part of your evolution. It is part of the regaining and raising of you. You're not going to get that through talking to a chatbot. You also probably shouldn't be having love relationships with them. So we really have to know that, you know, it's fine. You can have your computer, you can use Chat GPT, you can do all kinds of things that are controversial if it's in its right place. But when you start making it a religion and you start thinking that like spiritual beings are communicating with, like this is where it is. It's the same thing as space travel. If people want to go out into space and explore, mine an asteroid or two, be my guest. Probably not a good idea if the world is in shambles to invest that kind of money. But if you want to do it, have at it. But where it gets too far, again, is when people start to make it a weird cult, a weird religion. Like, we need to go into space to save the light of consciousness. We need to go to Mars to save the spirit of humanity. That's getting into mental illness. That's getting into atheism or weird stuff. That's the materialist speaking that doesn't understand the evolution of the earth and humanity, as I've spoken about in my last lecture. So you can enjoy these really futuristic things like space, like, you know, computers, things like that. But don't make it a weird religion where you think the light of consciousness is somewhere that it's not. Because that's materialism. That's spiritual materialism. Okay, this next one is from a member. And by the way, you guys, if you are enjoying this Q&A today, I do this every second Sunday. I would never miss it for the world. And I do this about 2 p.m. every second Sunday with my private group. And just like this, you submit your questions. Doesn't matter. We can talk about anything. We can talk about Steiner. We can talk about politics. We can talk about spiritual stuff, whatever you want to get into, we're there on Sunday. There's also incredible forums where you can discuss all of these topics with incredibly brilliant people. Other mystics are there. You don't have to be alone in your interest in spirituality. There's an incredible group over there and forums full of information and people. We do games. It's really fun. So I'd love to see you over there if you enjoy this. And there's hundreds and hundreds of hours of live Q&As just like this. They're pretty much time-stamped too. So whatever you like, it's probably there. So I'd love to see you over there. Okay. This is a member question. I feel as if humanity at the moment is very depraved and in a state of dark, degraded sexuality, and it makes me very sad. How did it come to be? Demons? Was it materialist views on humans that had negative influence on people's sexual ethics? Epstein loved evolutionary psychology. Interesting. Whenever you get into sexuality, it immediately becomes incredibly controversial because there's a lot of people in the world that are trying to solve psychological problems and spiritual problems through sexuality, through sex, and through the lower centers, trying to solve spiritual and psychological issues through the lower centers. Basically what it is, issues that should be solved through the heart center and through sort of really connecting with spirit. So this is basically it, on a spiritual level, because you're talking about evolutionary stuff here. Humanity used to operate in earlier conditions very much through the lower centers, and especially like in the Atlantean period and part of the Lemurian period for some, a lot of sort of magic was through the lower centers. But then in the post-Atlantean epoch, the magical position really rises to the heart. And slowly the lower centers are brought into the heart. They're brought into the higher centers. And then at a certain point, humanity will no longer reproduce as we normally do, and we will reproduce in a completely different way. So in other words, in humanity's very, very early condition in the Polarian epoch and the Hyperborean epoch, humanity reproduced actually in a completely different way than we do now. Sounds crazy, but we were in an astral form. Then in the Lemurian epoch is where we have the biblical Garden of Eden in creation. We also have the first splitting of genders there. And so when people are confused about gender, they're confused about sexuality, these kinds of things usually emerge in the soul in the Lemurian period and even in the Atlantean period. And we go through them to recapitulate and find that understanding, find that balance. But they're definitely primordial impulses within the human being that we work on life after life. And so over time, our goal is to really, like in earlier periods, if you talk to like certain mystics have talked about this before, but pretty much sexual forces were only used to create a child. Like if you really look at the different mystery sects, there was no concept of having sex and sexuality just for physical pleasure or even for connection. So how generally it came to be in the post-Atlantean epoch is that you would only engage in basically spilling out your life forces if you were creating a child. And this period was about overcoming the sexual impulse, which had become very strong in the Atlantean period. And so that's sort of what the classical mystery sects would say. And then if you were going to be a mystic, then there was a push towards actually often periods of celibacy in order to purify the lower centers of the human being and draw the energy upwards into the body to clarify it. This is not suppression and this is not repression. This is periods of celibacy and fasting to see if the individual has any unhealthy attitudes towards sex. If you're using sex for escapism, if you're using sex for all these different reasons in which that sexual impulse is not actually designed for. Okay, so there's a lot that can be said about this, but that's probably good for now. It's very interesting that one of the things that really stuck out in the anthroposophical system is that Rudolf Steiner says that one of the greatest challenges for humanity is to basically come to understand their lower impulses and where they are coming from and why. And that has to be done before the Saturn angel or Orpheal takes reign. And if humanity cannot sort out any sort of lower urges by that time, then there will be a splitting, basically, and a point of deep regression, but then also great progression. And that's in the Steiner work. So there's a lot that can be understood about the human sex impulse and even about gender by looking back into the Lemurian period when gender first came about in the human being, and also like the idea of Tantra, things like this, in the sexual sense of Tantra, those are actually more of an Atlantean throwback than they are for the post-Atlantean period, actually. And I know that's a controversial thing to say. People can believe what they want, but we have to acknowledge the progression of the human being through their own energy system, and that in our period, we are challenged to evaluate any kind of urges we have that are rooted in attachment, rooted in escapism, that is not even just sex. It could be food. It could be any kind of thing that is engaging the lower centers. It's all sort of can be the same impulse. So we're meant to look into those lower centers, and we're meant to say, where does this impulse come from? Why do I desire sex right now? Why do I desire food right now? Why do I desire this? Why do I desire that? Should I be going inward and connecting with God instead? Is this drawing my energy outward into physical sensation and physical pleasure, when really I need to detach from that and focus on drawing my energy deeply inward and building that connection with God within? Because physical sensation, physical pleasure of any kind can actually be a major distraction from inner development, believe it or not. Okay, this is a question from a member. I'm a huge fan of Stephen Greer. He's passionate and I trust him. You mentioned something about him that I can't cite. It had to do with, quote, no bad ETs. He talks about realms and technology. I absolutely love you too. I just got hung up because you said some derogatory things about him. I know you also mentioned that you haven't gone deep into his research. What is your opinion now? Well, I don't think I said anything derogatory about Dr. Stephen Greer. If I have disagreements with certain principles that individuals have, I wouldn't say that that's, a derogatory personal insult. It's just I don't agree with certain aspects of his cosmology. And I think that Stephen Greer would say that he disagrees with my cosmology, and that is fine. What did you ask specifically? Dr. Stephen Greer has done, I think, like yeoman's work, good work around, I think, bringing forward the Disclosure Project. I think he really had this kind of chutzpah where he gathered together all these different people who had really incredible experiences, and he really broke open for everyone the the idea, and he was a forerunner for the idea that the government is hiding advanced technology. And I agree with Stephen Greer on that. I agree with Stephen Greer that the government absolutely is hiding advanced technology. I disagree with Stephen Greer that the solution to that is to simply release it without acknowledging that this advanced technology has spiritual effects that need to be very carefully observed. And we need to understand that this technology does affect human consciousness. So it does need a careful, considerate rollout and proper education and proper understanding. I don't agree with anyone who is careless with this technology and talks about it in a way that does not acknowledge properly the spiritual effects of it. I disagree with anyone who does that. And I see a lot of people doing that. And I simply do not think that that is the stewardship that these devices require. Okay? That's where I am on that. In regards to his cosmology, I also disagree with his cosmology. I think that, in ufology, what people are calling aliens is a smokescreen for a bunch of different things that are not properly delineated. For example, I think what people are calling aliens are sometimes created by literally the government. I think that that does exist. I think sometimes there are different species actually on the earth and within the earth that look different than humanity, that relate to Atlantis or prior civilizations. A huge portion of our ocean is undiscovered. The cave systems are undiscovered. It's completely possible that there are crypto-terrestrials here. It's completely possible that these are also created chimera things. Okay, that's not an alien, yet people repeatedly call them alien, and that then gets conflated with angels. So people will go back to the Garden of Eden story, to Lucifer, to the influence of the aliens of the angels in Atlantis or Lemuria, and they'll call them aliens. It's not an alien, that's an angel. It's a very specific hierarchy of angels, and they had a very specific relationship with man for a specific reason. Man being part of that hierarchy. So the word alien is the worst word possible for that thing. And if you want to change the language, you have to give a good reason why you're changing the word angel to alien. You better have discovered something. You better have made a big revelation to change the language. Because when people start changing the language, it's often to create smoke screens, like changing UFO to UAP. So this changing of language is often how three-letter agencies or manipulative groups that are invested in that particular narrative get you into their stream. Because if you call it an angel and you talk about it like that, you have access to thousands of years of spiritual texts and conversations in which you can learn about angels in any tradition. You just got to connect the language. So the etymology and the history of the word is incredibly important for human consciousness. You've probably also used the word angel or the other complementary words like that in other lives. So this changing of language is, in my opinion, inherently manipulative. So when people are like, saying everything's an alien, we're getting things that are not alien at all. It's literally angels, fallen and exalted, or it's these weird created beings that, either the government makes, or it is, crypto-terrestrials, or it is like an interdimensional elemental. There's so many different things that are literally not alien. I don't see a point in calling them that. And when people start to do that, I know that they're within a certain culture in the occult. I know that they're within a certain group mind, basically. This is just my opinion. And So that's what I think. I just can't get behind that cosmology. I also can't get behind a cosmology where all angels would be positive as well. I think that there's obviously fallen angels. So that's my opinion. I think that if I sat down with Stephen Greer, I think that I'd have a lot of things that I would agree with, and I think that I would have a lot of respect for him bringing certain people forward. But then when it gets to the esoteric side of his arguments and his cosmology, I would say I don't agree. And I think that's okay. I think it's okay that we have these different opinions, and I'll just leave it there. I also feel like, listen, it's possible to, you know, disagree and like both people and get something a little different from them. It's up to the individual, right? And yeah, that's how I see it. I mean, when I look at these things, I'm coming from a mystical perspective and a spiritual perspective. So the moment that that starts to get weird for me, it's a no-go, because what ends up happening is, well, I'm gonna leave it there. Okay. This one is from Sandrine. Can you help me understand the moon as an energy force? Specifically, the moon lock, Earth's karma, feminine energy, protection belt, the first step in destruction before the black sun. This is a lot. Kamaloka, the realm of desire, and Earth's astral plane. Yeah, wow, this is like wow, to cover all of these topics, we're looking at a 3-hour lecture for sure. But the moon is a fascinating body because the moon, in the occult, esoteric sense, represents the Earth's past. That's what the moon represents spiritually to the Earth. But the moon also, the space between the moon is kind of like a figure eight, like this. And it forms what is called in the Eastern traditions Kamaloka as well. It's also represented as a mirror, and it behaves as a mirror. So when you go into the astral plane, generally the first thing that you experience is like a mirroring effect. And usually the heaviest parts of yourself are reflected to you. This also has to do with the moon and the region of the moon. So, when you have Alice and she's going through the mirror, that's Alice. That's your soul going through Kamaloka. That's your soul passing through the mirror of the moon realm. So you could say that Earth's sort of, a portion of the Earth's old karma is also held in the moon. And at a certain point, the moon will actually return to the Earth and be reabsorbed into the Earth. Just like at a certain point, the Earth will be reabsorbed into the sun. But at that point, the Earth is spiritualizing. The Earth is losing matter all the time. And so eventually it will return. Okay, and that's actually when reproduction normally stops. And that will represent sort of the full karma of the Earth coming back into itself, if you will. Yes, the moon is also a protection. And I know that there's a lot of people who look at the reality that they feel the moon has been tampered with, or the moon has unusual characteristics, and then it immediately means aliens. Like anything weird is now an alien. That's our culture. And we should really be looking and saying, okay, well, if we had the ability for flight in Atlantis, and even you could say the atmosphere was different in the Atlantean period than it is now. It's much more difficult now. But It's much more locked down now, you could say, than it was in Atlantis. But we had the ability to fly. We had flight in Atlantis, and the tampering of the moon, in my opinion, from what I've seen, isn't aliens, it is us in the Atlantean period. And I've talked about this in my last lecture, which is Earth-Mars history. I talked about that in the last portion of that lecture, so I won't reiterate that here. But the reason why the moon is tampered with is because the moon is actually a protective force. The moon forms the barrier, basically, that separates the Earth from the lower astral plane. So if you can change the character of the moon, if you can basically take it over and alter it and turn it into a machine, then you're controlling the gate of death. Okay, so this is what black magicians want to do, in my opinion, by going into space, is to alter the planets through creating a shifting of poles or creating alternating them, because it brings forth certain forces that the planets, especially the moon, protect us from. The moon is the protection for the Earth. Now, Faust talks about the moon, very interesting. He talks about the moon and he calls the moon the mother, but also he talks about kind of the lunar essences as the three mothers. These are the three prior conditions of the Earth that are held within the moon. And so when you mess with the moon, you're messing with the gate to the abyss. That's what it is on the occult side. And we wonder, I was talking about this, and this is something that Dark Journalist has been trying to get across for a very long time, which is that why have we not been going to the moon? We just went in, the 60s, and there's a lot of weird things about that casts a lot of doubt. But just because, the drones are all in the sky and suddenly all these people are coming forward often out of nowhere. I don't know if you guys have noticed this, but suddenly these people will just emerge onto the podcast scene, and they have very little social media history, and they just become huge, and they start going on all these interviews, and they just start talking about advanced technology, and we're going to bring this out, or start talking about different things. I've noticed that. But what if we do have technology? There is a secret space program, if you will. And there is, people are going out in there, out in space, but with a technology that is hidden in a way that is hidden, in order to prepare for certain, you could say, situations in which one day it can be revealed, but they have to get a certain head start, and they have to put certain things in place. And all of this began in Atlantis, and it's really picking up where they left off in Atlantis, in which there are still satellites from the Atlantean period in space. So in other words, you get the technology, you race to redevelop it. You have to have a period, if you're these maniacal groups with the technology, where you develop it privately. Okay? You do all your stuff, and then one day, which looks to be pretty soon, one day you bring it forward. I have all the answers. I have the free energy device. I have all the answers. Meanwhile, give me a break. Meanwhile, they've had this technology for at least 80 years. They've been developing AI. They've been developing this stuff behind the scenes in different projects for decades. There is no AI race. They wouldn't be bringing this out and testing it. They're not releasing any advanced technology with that kind of power unless they've already developed it intensely behind the scenes. And then one day, when they have it all developed and all ready, they start having the UFO hearings, they start having the drones in the sky, start getting you excited, people start going around talking about it. Because now it's ready, now that we've mastered it, now that we can use it in a way in which can potentially enslave, now it can come forward. Well, guess what? We're aware, and we're not gonna take that, are we? We're not gonna do that. Because when I see the drones, and when I see people can laugh or whatever, but I see trying to urge people towards this weird technological revolution, and there's a better way. So that's what I can say there about the moon. From an occult sense, the moon is a protection. The feminine energy stands, the feminine stands on the barrier between matter and ether. And even the machine is actually a female, if you will. It is Mother Nature. It is the mother. The moon and the earth are really that force. And this is why you see Maria in the German silent film Metropolis portrayed as a robot. This is the same reason why they want to turn the moon into a machine, turn the earth into a machine, because every feminine force, every feminine thing, including the earth, including women, including the moon, have to be turned into machines. That is what this impulse is, and that is exactly why you also see these weird fake wombs with growing babies, not a woman to be found. This is the fallen Mars impulse. You have to get to know this. You have to understand this. That is the spiritual impulse of the fallen angels behind this. Okay? And it does connect to the moon because Mars and moon are actually also on the occult level united. Okay. Okay, this is from a member. If God created the world, why is there so much suffering? Why God allows the existence of evil? There are people saying that this reality is created by Satan and is a false one. A simulation world, God, the simulation, a simulation world made by corrupt beings for the corrupt people, while the rest of us are stuck here. So the lower astral plane and the subnatural world and the lower portion of the cosmos, if you're just looking at it and you're unable to see the higher aspect, it looks like a machine, it looks like a simulation. But it's not actually a simulation. It's actually what you're looking at is actually the life functions of higher beings. So you actually cannot define the cosmos as a simulation or as a machine and have that be a concept that's actually working in your body and in your being as an evolutionary concept. I see this all the time where people try to like externalize a spirituality too much and they end up creating an ideology that's inhuman. They often end up creating like a machine world or like an inhuman world. The only thing you can do from that point is literally project into it. So how you view the cosmos from a true initiatory stance is you view the cosmos as beings, as everything is a being, including things like electricity, including magnetism. You have to see it as a being within beings. And you have to see yourself as the creative point in which it determines the nature of these things. But you have to see them as beings because you're a being. So when you start constructing an inhuman cosmos, a machine cosmos, a holographic cosmos, a simulation cosmos, you're only looking at the lower astral plane and really even not even that, you're really looking at the subnatural world, which is all atomized and mechanical. The definition of the subnatural world and the lower astral plane is automata, is mechanized. There's no spirit, there's no life in it. There's no being in it. It's just machine. like when you're an NPC, there's no life in you. So you have to view the cosmos as life. You have to view the cosmos as spirit, as one great being with hierarchies of beings within it. And you're in that. And that's what gives you the proper structure in which to evolve. So it's not that you can't view it as like a but why? You know, if it's not a living concept within you, it's not going to evolve you. It's just interesting. And once you reduce something that far, you become hyper reductive. It's very difficult to get it back. So you always start an analysis as a being, as a human being. And then you can go from human beingness to angel. You can go from human beingness to subnatural, to animal, to plant, to mineral, to elemental. But you always start from beingness. You always start from humanness. You don't start at a machine and then like make the human being the controller of the machine in order to have some kind of life in it. You begin with life itself, with beingness itself, and see the whole cosmos as being a being and beings within beings, okay? I've talked about the simulation a lot, so type that into my channel and I've discussed that. But suffering is how we evolve, quite simply. You know, we don't come to the earth plane to find comfort. I'm just going to be honest. You know, this is a hard school. And we're not meant to exist in this plane forever, and we're meant to be challenged here. And through that challenge, through that pressure is how we form the right questions to know God, to develop our individuality. All of the pain that we have, all of the pain that we feel, on the other side is wisdom and lies the heart of our evolution. So it is through the pain and it's through the difficulty that we experience the pressure and the contrast to know who we really are. And when we're in it, when we're in the depression, when we're in the anxiety, it feels like everything's gone. It feels like there's nothing. And it's so hard to see beauty. It's so hard to get out of that. But you have to know that one of the things about this life is it happens in rhythms. And through inward focus and through learning to observe your inner rhythms, you get better and better at kind of surfing them. And if you can develop within yourself a priority to create deep peace, and in a very Zen way, avoid the high highs and the low lows, it really keeps things more consistent emotionally. But God allows evil for our evolution, because in order to understand what is right, we have to see the inversion of it. It's kind of like how in this conversation today we've been talking about technology. And it's like, you know, through seeing the inverted and parasitic and dark versions of technology and dark potentials with technology, we get a much clearer picture of natural technology, of why connection with the earth is so important, and why, you know, your deep connection with your body is important, why embodiment is so important. So oftentimes it's like that struggle is where our learning comes from. But when you're really hurting or you're suffering incredible loss, it's like you can't think about it that way. It's almost like mocking you to say it, but that's the spiritual reality. That's what it is. And it's sort of like Lucifer and Ahriman, or these kind of fallen angel figures, they do sort of create a mechanical world, and that is called the eighth sphere. So in occult science, there is sort of like a holographic, weird, mechanical machine world that's created by Lucifer and Ahriman, and that's called the eighth sphere. But the eighth sphere is not the entire cosmos. The eighth sphere is literally this lower kind of fallen aspect that surrounds the earth. So it's not the whole cosmos. It's just, you know, when you lose your humanity, you become like a machine. And when the cosmos becomes inhuman, it also looks like a machine. And so we have to understand what that automation means. Spiritually, it means lower world. It means no life. It doesn't have life. The cosmos has life. It is living. It is a living being. Okay? All right. So we're going to do a few more here. Okay, Dan. My father and grandfather were Masons for their whole life. I recently joined but do not resonate with the organization. In your opinion, do you believe Freemasonry to be a nefarious group, or just one that dabbles in the occult? On the surface, Blue Lodge is pretty harmless, although I'm wondering if it is a front for something bigger. Interesting. So I think that Freemasonry is massive. So I think there's a lot of really harmless Freemasonry groups that are like basically social networking groups. Like it's basically like a business decision to go in there. But then also rooted in Freemasonry, there's also a lot of very covert and weird things, and the Freemasonic tradition does hide a lot of dark occult stuff, and people do use Freemasonry for its secrecy, and there's definitely certain lodges that are deep in politics, but I don't think all lodges are. And I think what's also important to recognize with Freemasonry and with different occult societies, but we'll just take Freemasonry, is that it wasn't always the character that it has now. In earlier periods, it wasn't the same thing as it is today. It has really evolved to be a caricature of spirituality. So I think that a lot of people go into Freemasonry as sort of like a simple fraternity, social reasons, I think business reasons, I think because family is in it. But I don't, for a lot of people, it's not the image of like a real occult initiatory mystery school or something like that. But there's definitely, I do think that there is a dark aspect of Freemasonry, for sure. But I don't think that like, Uncle Joe, who is a Shriner, or like certain people are, just because you're a Freemason, I do not think that you're engaged in Satanism. I think there's a lot of people that use it for different reasons. But there's no question that they use occult symbology, that there is occult rituals involved in it. It's an occult order, so you are participating in that. But it's not something that it maybe once was, or what it could be. And I think that's true not just for Freemasonry, but a bunch of these different orders. I don't think they have the character that they initially started with. Okay, this is a member question. Does the manifestation techniques like The Secret change now that we are in a period when we are trying to spiritualize out of matter? Yeah, so The Secret, for those of you who don't know, was a book and a movie that was all about the law of attraction. And this was basically kind of, I think it was like in the earlier 2000s or 2010s. And it changed like spirituality and motivational speaking. Like it was, Oprah had The Secret people on, but the criticism for The Secret was, like decades later, is that it was kind of like focusing too much on what you can get. So like it was like just create a vision board and you can have this car and you can attract into your life whatever you want. And so it started to kind of get this weird bend where the only reason why you would engage with spirit was to basically get stuff. So, and that's kind of like black magic-y, right? Where you're using the spirit, you're using spiritual principles to gain material things. But and on the other side, it was also very good because I think, a lot of people for the first time were realizing, hey, my mind does have an influence on me creating my world, because people have to understand that during that period, a lot of people didn't think that they could really affect their reality like that with their mind. They didn't think they could really control the situations in their life. People felt very much like they were, sort of not necessarily victims of circumstance, but they felt like you had a certain path in life that you took, you had to take it. And so I think that The Secret introduced a kind of whimsy. I think it empowered people to really think about who they are and what they want. And I think that that was a good way in for a lot of people into spirituality because, it's commonplace now to understand that thoughts are things and you affect your reality. But again, that was not common, really, unless you were deep into some spiritual circles. For the average person, it was not common. So I think that there were good things with The Secret, but I also think that some of the emphasis needs to evolve, and it needs to not be focused on just creating a vision board to go on a vacation or to have a certain body or to have a certain life. I mean, why we engage with manifestation or why we think about the future or what we want is really to honor God. It's really to have a life in which we are honestly in service. It's not really actually what you need to be happy to create all these attachments in your life where I'm not going to be happy unless I have this relationship. I'm not going to be happy unless I have this car. I'm not going to be happy until my vision board is achieved. That's creating intense attachment, actually. And that's not the point of spirituality. The point of spirituality is to be liberated from the material through basically slowly over time weaning yourself from attachment, weaning yourself from things that you need, and slowly taking those cords and connecting them to God and connecting them to Christ and being able to live a life not controlled by desire. That is liberation. And so in spirituality, it's actually to detach and to be inspired by God, by your higher self, and to find a way in which you can live in love and harmony and in service, and that is the greatest joy. The greatest joy is actually not you having anything. The greatest joy is for you to give everything. And that is when your true self appears, and that is when God really appears within you. So that's the real secret. That's the real secret. And that's where any serious spiritual path will lead you, not to creating addictions, not to forever tethering yourself to these different weird goals and dreams that actually won't make you happy. All happiness stems from being on the journey to create inner awareness and peace and union with Christ in our heart. That is where all the peace and joy is. And it's so funny when you start to feel that, when you have those glimpses, when you have those flashes of God within you, you feel that, you know that. And then life bears down on us again. And we've got bills to pay, and our friend isn't doing very well, and this life, all this stuff is going on, and we forget what God feels like inside of us. And so the challenge is to really keep that feeling alive within us and keep practices alive, keep practices going that unite us with God. Because there's always going to be challenges, but we have to work and surf them and endure them. So that's what I think on The Secret. That's a very that's a very deep answer. Okay. This one is from Elena. Hi, Elena. If it is known that we will be different evolutionary stages and that there will be an epoch where Ahriman forces will prevail, before we get to the stage of Christic light taking over, are we still supposed to fight Contras, the Ahrimanic forces, even though it is a necessary stage for our evolution? Or do we just let it be? Great question. So what Elena is talking about here is would sort of be in like mainstream Ahriman would be like the Antichrist. So in Rudolf Steiner's cosmology, he actually has the Persian name for the devil for Ahriman. And he actually has a more sort of sophisticated view of evil, where evil is not just a dual force, but there's actually two polar evils, which is Lucifer, which is a kind of an expansive evil, which is actually a different kind of force than Ahriman. And Ahriman is sort of the Saturnian materializing scientific materialism evil. So he delineates a different kind of evil. And why he does that is because these are fallen forces that appear at certain times for certain reasons to challenge humanity. They're not the same force, so they cannot be observed as the same force. Lucifer and Ahriman are different kinds of evil. And Lucifer can be viewed a little differently than Ahriman. So we are going to see the incarnation of the Antichrist, of Ahriman. That's been prophesied by many different people over time. That is true. And the tricky thing is that it's like, we know that there is this incredibly inverted personality that's going to come in and going to kind of be a Pied Piper for a lot of souls that are not yet awakened. They're not yet self-aware. So Ahriman's as an entity is really the representative of, you could say, humanity's nature that is, I guess you could say, unawakened, if you will. And so he's kind of like this Pied Piper figure that is going to siphon all of these people and all of these souls into his world, basically. Yet the entire earth has to sort of experience that. And honestly, I think it's funny. It's like, you know, I think one of the most psychologically painful things is not necessarily you yourself going through torment, but I think it's actually seeing groups of people and other people go through something. Do any of you guys feel like that's almost like a kind of torture, is to see like innocent people or people who are unaware kind of get sucked into something that's dangerous? I feel like that's a specific kind of torment. And it's tough, because I feel like that is kind of what's going on, where we're going to see society split into people who are going to go with the Ahrimanic impulse, which is manifesting in our time as a hyper-technological era where machines are spiritualized. We're already seeing it. I mean, people are thinking that their angels are talking to them through the chat GPT. You know, people think that, you know, they're going to incarnate fallen angels and the Antichrist into a machine. And they're going to go for it, and they're going to do the rights that they're going to, I mean, this is a weird time. And so it's not that we're trying to prevent that. We don't prevent the incarnation, right, of Ahriman. What you want to do is you seek to understand the Ahrimanic force and actually integrate it into your being properly through Christ. So in the anthroposophical system, there is an incredible sculpture that Rudolf Steiner made called I think it's called the Image of Humanity. Please correct me in the chat or comments if I'm wrong on that. I think it's supposed to be the Image of Humanity. And you can see the Christ. And the Christ, one hand is up like this, and he is keeping Lucifer at bay. And then one hand is down, like the magician in tarot, and he is keeping Ahriman at bay. So it's the Christ within us, the Christ being within us, that actually leads to the proper balancing and integration of the Luciferic forces, the forces of Lucifer, and the Ahrimanic forces, or the forces of Ahriman. So it's not a simplistic situation going on where the Antichrist should be prevented, or where you want to deny yourself the development of technology, or you want to deny natural science. You want to get the best of these things, but you want them harmonized through the Christ impulse. And so just as there is the Ahrimanic impulse that will develop, so too, eked out into the earth and into man, will there be the path of Christ. And this is the return of Christ, who is in the etheric, in an etheric form. He's not in a physical form. The Christ exists in the etheric world as an etheric being, as the template and the group soul for our own resurrection body. He is the resurrection body, if you will. He is the glorified etheric form. Okay, so he is there, and people are going to more and more have experiences with the Christ that is going to awaken them. And you can see that happening already. So there's going to be a path that is the Christ path that draws people deeper into nature, deeper into understanding the Christ. But that is also through integrating the forces of Lucifer and Ahriman through Christ. So it's balancing, actually. It's integration and balancing through Christ. So the Ahrimanic forces will not prevail. You know, the Antichrist will have no effect on you if you are a spiritual person with Christ in your heart. He will have no effect on you on a deep level. It will be like ships in the night, right? You will be working in a completely different sphere spiritually. But if you are unaware and you are falling into spiritual materialism, if you are, you know, unawakened in that sense, then people are going to get Pied Pipered to varying different degrees into that harmonic system. But even if someone falls into that system, it's not the end of the world. You are a child of God, and everybody has Christ within their heart. You know, there's no gender, color, you know, whatever. I don't care if you have like one leg. Like, you have Christ within your being, which is in many ways the most incredible revolution of this planet, is to have that being within us. And that we actually achieve that and receive that is actually more incredible than we can imagine. And so that force is within us to keep us safe, to protect us, and to have us evolve through that force, through working with that force and becoming that force into a higher path, which is called New Jerusalem or New Jupiter. But it is the case that parallel to that, there will be incredible dark things that happen through Ahriman as well. And you will see that in your lifetime. But it doesn't mean that you're directly participating in that, right? I think it's not about, again, it's not about preventing the incarnation of Ahriman. It's about understanding it, and through experiencing it, we learn more about the Christ, really. That's really what it is. So even when I'm critical of technology, or I'm critical of certain things that have a distinctly harmonic quality, I'm critical of the harmonic aspect of these things, right? Okay. Danny, are the gods that exist in ancient mythologies real beings? I've always wondered if they were fallen angels or humans who had accessed higher spiritual powers due to the harsh nature of the stories and the very materialistic impulses of those gods. I would love to hear your insights on this. So Danny is asking, who are the beings in myth? And are they angels? Are they fallen angels? Okay, this is a really good question, because when people would talk about exalted beings, it could be a few different things, actually. So sometimes when you're looking at a god, it's an angel. So when you look at like the idea of like Apollo or the sun god, a lot of those depictions are about Archangel Michael, like the solar angel. And sometimes they would also portray what would be called like the sun initiate, or a human being who had united with the solar angel or with an angel. So usually it's talking about the angels. So if you look at how the angels were portrayed in earlier traditions, they were usually portrayed as planets. That's because every single angel or every single planet is actually an archangel, is actually an angelic being, and then you're incarnating literally into a being. That's why it's not a machine, is because every planet is literally a being. Every realm is a being, or you could see it as the strata of many beings. So you're literally within a being. That's what it is. The earth is a being. Every planet is a being. That's why when you look at different, like the Greek or the Roman images of the gods, they're planetary gods because they're angels. So the old beings in myths are often describing the activities in heaven, the fall of angels, certain angels evolving, or they're describing when a human being becomes a Buddha or a Dhyani Buddha or a saint, somebody who is, so when you have like an exalted individuality, what's happening is that their spiritual body is actually occupied by an angel or an archangel or an archai. So they're actually basically like an angel incarnate, or an angel's working through them. And these were often depicted as similar to the gods. And so this is why, again, I caution people from using the alien stuff and the Anunnaki stuff, because it distinctly ignores initiation and the reality that how the gods were portrayed was literally talking about angels, or they were talking about a human being who was spiritually united with a spiritual being while they were in a physical form, or was the incarnation of a spiritual being into a physical form, into a human form to do a great deed. Okay, so we have to always look at the ancient past through the lens of initiation science, through how is humanity evolving, and they're always evolving through uniting with angels. So there's also the war in heaven. There's also different battles in heaven that are described as the gods battling, these would be angels, and these were seen as gods, basically. That's what it is. Um, yeah, so those are the two things. Angels or like a Buddha, a bodhisattva, would sometimes be portrayed as a god because technically it was like a very, very advanced soul. Okay, so we're going to do one more question and then we're going to call it a night. Okay, so the last question. Okay, so we're going to do, I think I lost my place. Okay, so we're going to do one more question. And we're going to do we'll finish with an Ahriman question because we've been covering that today. This is a member question, and you said when Ahriman will incarnate fully as an adult, how long will he be in the flesh and do his work? Is it only 3 years, or could we expect a long or very long time? This question is not unimportant concerning our work in opposing and matching, transforming, or presenting alternatives to the people. Yeah. So I have different sort of thoughts on Ahriman, but these have to be regarded as my own thoughts. And so these are not Rudolf Steiner's thoughts or anything. These are just my ideas about it. I want to make that clear. So I think for me, I think that the year 2032 and the year 2033 is the time potentially where we may see Ahriman step on the stage. That's where at this point in time I think is significant. And I know that that's sort of where some Sorath activity happens. And I see Sorath as being an extension or united with Ahriman spiritually. And so I also don't see Ahriman personally as being something that is born of a mother or born of a woman. In my mind, I think that Ahriman may be some kind of cyborg, or if he is born of a woman, I think he's got strange parts, but I almost feel like he actually is more likely a kind of Frankenstein character. I think the myth of Frankenstein is very much about Ahriman. And this idea of the golem and stuff seems pretty interesting to me. I have never considered actually how long he will influence or he will work. I'm not sure if Rudolf Steiner said for only 3 years, but I do feel like the Ahrimanic force is very present in the spiritual world, in the astral world, and I could see, him almost needing to kind of come into the world at a certain point, but there's no question that if the world can be basically bathed in radiation, from different satellites radiating down, if the earth is becoming more and more saturated with electricity and, man-made magnetism, man-made electricity, I think that Ahriman can operate in that substrate. I think that it's almost like will maybe come forward to ground his existence and his influence, but I think that how I see it is that he will exist within the machine, sort of the sort of electrified, distorted ether that is really the eighth sphere that's coming about through all these weird technologies. I think he'll live within that substrate, in general. And so I think that he's different. He's different than Lucifer in his incarnation, because I see Ahriman personally as having this incredible synthetic cyborg quality. And I think that has to do with how he fell. And it was a difference. He fell from a different rank in a different way than Lucifer fell. So I think that when we figure out that secret as to how he fell in the situation, it reveals a lot about why he is born the way, or why he comes about the way that he does and how he operates. So that's what I would say there. I have to probably take some time and really try to feel in more about Ahriman. I haven't really sat down and worked with this since probably my Electric Apocalypse lecture, which was really most about discussing that man-made electricity and man-made or electricity that stems from machines and from man-made things is not the same as a lightning bolt, and it's not the same as natural electricity. And the disturbing and the agitating of the ether with different devices, and the creation of the eighth sphere through these kinds of things, the manifesting of the eighth sphere, and the materialization of Ahriman through that. I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done. I think that the book, it's called The Electronic Doppelganger, The Electric Doppelganger. It's an anthroposophical book that goes into, it really it explains why Ahriman's incarnation will be in America. It explains Ahriman, it explains the electronic doppelganger, the human doppelganger. Really, really great book to check out. All right, you guys. Thank you so much for being with me today. It's been my absolute joy. I hope you enjoyed this. Don't forget that I do this again every second Sunday. So I have a private platform that I have a group with, and we do this every other Sunday. You just ask questions and we answer them. You can talk about anything. There's also forums, which are super fun. So there's a community. And I am going to be lecturing this month. I've got a lot of things coming down the pipe for January and February. Yeah, let me say hello to you guys out there if I can. Ooh. Okay. All right, hello, Mystical Rainbow. Yoto Jojo. Kevin Spencer, hello. Christine Morgan. Okay, Ryzak, Mystical Rainbow Casey, hello. Kira Ra, Finir. Okay, hello. Josh Savage. Oh my gosh. Hi, guys. Thank you so much for joining me. And also, don't forget to sign up for my newsletter, actually, because I know that not everybody gets notifications or follows me on social media. So don't forget to sign up for my newsletter. That is on my website, and that way you'll know right away if I'm going to be doing another live Q&A or a lecture or whatever it is. And I will leave you guys to the rest of your Wednesday. Take care.